Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for returning for another episode of Just a Tip with Dr. Vic and Sex Nerd Podcast. My name is Dr. Victoria Hartman, and today I'm going to jump right into it with Dr. Jim Jobin. Some of you might know him from my previous appearances on his show and mentions that I have made on my show. Otherwise, he is one of the co-hosts of Pod Therapy Guys, and it's very popular. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Jobin. Is it okay if I call you Dr. Jim?
His Excellency will suffice. His holiness, his greatness. These are the things that I prefer. Yeah, Tsar Nicholas.
The king.
Yeah. It's so exciting to finally repay the favor of you being on our show. You've been on several of our episodes all the way back to our first season when we were recording in a little closet.
Was that first season?
That you were with us on the very first season.
Oh my God, I did not know that.
Oh yeah. Now we're in season 5.
Wow.
So we've been doing this now for 5 years, and your episodes are always a hit. Every time we have you on, it's just nonstop positive feedback. People are like, "She is so cool," and we just had a conference that came to town, and we had 200 people in the audience. We got to do live shows. It was so much fun, and we told everybody.
Set up by you.
We were part of it. Yeah. So a bigger podcast hosted it. And then we got to be a part of that. And we were telling everybody, go down to the Erotic Heritage, like see everything over there, say hi to Dr. Victoria. So I hope that we send some people your way, because there were so many people that love your work, and just more people need to know about it, because you're awesome at everything you do.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'm humbled. Well, thank you also for being on my show. You often get all kinds of interesting questions. You have really great followers and viewers, and they're very engaging. And as I was getting ready for this week, I've been off for 2 weeks. And I hadn't been engaging much online. And so I put a video out there, a short one about, are there any topics? And you responded right away and said, actually, we have all kinds of questions. I went, I've actually never done anything like that before. Let's do that. Yeah. And so here we are.
Oh, yeah. No, it's interesting. So our show, Pod Therapy, we get basically just written in questions. It's kind of old school, kind of radio love line sort of, kind of feel, or like Dr. Fraser Crane kind of nonsense. And so, our tone is lighthearted, casual, and we get great questions. And sometimes they're about very serious things. It could be, any number of things, sometimes about relationships. But very commonly, we get really interesting questions about sexuality. And neither of us is a sex expert. We try to answer it from a mental health angle or from a relationship angle. But boy, I got to tell you, I'm excited to share your feedback, your thoughts, your perspective on these particular questions with our general audience. And I know that they'll be psyched to kind of get a little bit, A, everybody loves you anyway, and B,
psyched and hopefully a little bit titillated, because that's my job as a sexologist.
It helps. It's really fun. Okay, so good. I do have a question that we got to recently, and this question came from Anonymous, and Anonymous identifies as male, which is probably helpful. Anonymous didn't tell us how old they are. Okay. Our guess is that they may be in their early 20s. So that's kind of the little bit of demo stuff.
Okay.
So I will read you this one. The letter was titled, "My best friend slept with my crush right next to me." And here's what it says. Hey guys, first off, just want to say I love the show. Started listening to it, been hooked ever since. Great source of comfort and entertainment for me. Look forward to it every week. Recently, I've been going out for drinks with my best friend a lot. And there's this girl he's been really into, whose name is Emily. I've been really into her friend. Her name is Kate, who's in the same circle as me. We're all part of the same friend group. The other day, me and my friend went to the bar, and Emily and Kate happened to be there. And I was really hitting it off with Kate. We were having a great conversation, and we even talked about hanging out together soon, getting septum piercings together, and playing music together. Needless to say, I was really excited about this. But then, as it got later, my friend came up to me and told me that Emily and Kate told him they were interested in having sex with both of us tonight, but like as a group. I've never done anything like that and wasn't even that interested, but I felt like I didn't want to miss the chance to get closer with Kate. Plus, I wanted to seem like I'm down for anything, which we now know clearly I am not. Anyway, we all went to my friend's house and we were all mostly naked on his bed. Long story short, I start kissing Kate and he starts kissing Emily. But then my friend says, "Why don't you guys flip around?" My heart instantly sank as I realized my friend was about to make out with my crush, Kate, and I was about to have to try to make out with this other girl, Emily, who I'm not romantically interested in. Pretty soon, I just stopped trying to make any advances on Emily because one, I like her as a friend, and two, I'm sitting here watching my best friend make out with my crush, Kate. Then me and Emily are just laying there, chilling, cracking jokes about a movie that we had on. Meanwhile, my friend and my crush are literally full on having intercourse right next to us. My friend's hand is nearly grazing my arm as he does this, which made it all the more visceral to me. They eventually got a room, and I just laid there listening to them across the house until I finally drove home. The next day, Kate texted me and apologized profusely and claimed she was too drunk to remember anything that had happened, and she never would have done any of that if she was sober. I quite frankly do not believe anyone in that room was actually drunk, so I'm sure she's just trying to be nice and make me feel better while giving herself an excuse. Anyway, I still have feelings for her, and I hated my best friend for doing that because he knew that I was into her, and I figured since he was into the other girl, we'd both just stick to our respective crushes. I responded to Kate's text saying it was hard for me to watch what happened because I've been really interested in her. And then she responded and said she's been really interested in me too, which was exciting to hear about. But I feel like this nightmare of an experience has tainted any possibility of me starting a relationship with Kate. I don't know what to think or what to do. Part of me wants to draw the line and cut her off romantically, almost more out of self respect than anything. And part of me still wants to try with her because now I know she likes me too and seemed to regret what happened. Maybe I shouldn't place so much importance on sex in experiences like this, but I have no idea. I feel like there's more, but this gives you context of what's been going on. Really looking forward to the feedback. Thank you so much, Anonymous.
That's a lot to unpack, because you have a few different things going on there. And the thing that stands out to me the most is this particular person is struggling with setting some personal boundaries. So they're confused about their own personal boundaries around a number of things: relationships, sex. And I think that would be where I start before we get into jealousy and these other things. Where I would start from is, if your gut is telling you something doesn't feel right, it's okay to stop whatever's going on and exit or check out or say, you know what, this doesn't work for me. I'm going to go. And it sounded like that was this person's gut instinct as soon as there was a suggestion to swap. And I would have suggested to that person, in hindsight, obviously things are 2020, but when that first gut instinct hit, was to say, you know what, that's not going to work for me. I understand that since that person didn't know, or Kate didn't know that let's assume it's a he, that he liked her. There was some awkwardness and the concern of pushing Kate away and so forth. But still, I think there would have been possible to be able to set a boundary and not give away everything right in that moment and say, that's not going to work for me. And then have the same conversation that they had with her later, which was, you know what, that wasn't going to work for me because I actually really like you. And I wasn't all that interested in Emily. So I decided to check out. So I would say, if anything, if this person's gut instinct now is to say, I want to cut her off romantically, but I also still want to give it a chance, is take a time out. Take time out from the whole thing. Say, you know what, I need to Kate, I need to think about this for a little while because I'm having really mixed feelings about it. And I need to get in touch with myself and how I feel about this. And then we can move forward. And that would have been an okay conversation to have without everything else happening and not stopping when it felt uncomfortable the first time. And that's an okay conversation to have. And I did a previous episode that I called Why Dating Sucks. I did this maybe a couple of months ago. And in that episode, I started talking about, and I when I was in private practice, I heard this all the time. There seems to be this separation between our emotional attachments and our sexual attachments. And we're having a hard time being honest with each other about it, that while we might be super connected, and you hear this also in long-term marriages too, where there might be a really strong bond emotionally or relationally or psychologically, there could be incredible divergence in how we interact with each other sexually with that same person. And it's scary to be honest. It's scary to say here, because if you think about it, there's 3 different aspects to each of us: our sexual identity or sexual orientation, our relational orientation, and our erotic orientation. There's 3 different orientations we have. Now, there's some disagreement about whether or not we should call our erotic and our relational orientation an orientation. So far, we're mostly agreeing on our sexual orientation, bi, straight, gay, etc. But there's also the relational orientation and an erotic orientation. Erotic orientation is obviously what we're into sexually, right? And then our relational orientation: are we monogamous, non-monogamous? And in what way are we non-monogamous? Are we oriented towards triads or quads or groups or what have you? And when we date, we're so in a rush to present ourselves in a certain way that we forget to have those other conversations. And then 5 years down the road, we're sitting across from this person hiding parts of ourselves because we didn't have those conversations to begin with. And this is a great example of that playing itself out in real time. Okay. So I'll start with that. So I don't think that this person has a problem at all with jealousy or anything else. I think it was a matter of there was so much going on that those 3 things: identity, relational, sexual, etc. There was just too much in order to be able to deal with it in that moment, right? And as a society, we're not really taught. Yeah, you hear it in the media and so forth. Set good boundaries for yourself. Set good boundaries for yourself. But are we really taught to set good boundaries? As we grow up as children, even just go kiss your aunt goodbye. Well, what if you're 5 years old and you don't want to kiss your aunt goodbye? Well, then your parents get on your case about not being nice to your aunt. So from little, we're taught to deny our own gut instincts. Now, as adults, how do you think that's going to affect us? So I would start there. Now, to simplify things a little bit, jealousy is a complicated emotion, and those of us in the sexological field have considered its origins. And one of the perspectives that I've really enjoyed advocating for and applying in my own life, and once I did, jealousy wasn't an issue anymore, is that jealousy is a surface emotion for other things. Inadequacy, feelings of inadequacy. Well, what's underneath the inadequacy? And one of the directions it seems that we go that we're not recognizing is grief. Okay, why would we be grieving, feeling insecure as a result of that grief, and then that manifests as jealousy? Well, in this person's case, they wanted to have an experience with Kate, but were witness to them having that same experience with someone else. So there was a loss there, which then added another layer of feeling insecure, which then added another layer of jealousy. So what I would invite people to do where jealousy is concerned is to sit with it. Sit with it, especially sexual jealousy, relational jealousy, etc. Is to sit with it and figure out what its origins are. Because I would argue that jealousy is a superficial red flag of things that are going on underneath. Now, in more experienced people who are practicing non-monogamous, this is something that they have to deal with. And recognizing that it's grief over my partner is wired a certain way. Oh, here's a great visual example. Okay. So here's your partner and you in the center, right? here's one of your sexual interests or other interests that you have. Here's one of theirs, and you can't dance. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with either of you. It just means that there are parts of you that you're not wired the same. So in non-monogamous situations, you go dance somewhere else here and the other person goes, but the core is still there, right? So jealousy often, I think, has its roots in grief and loss over not being able to connect with a partner in that way. And perhaps what this person experienced was a microcosm of that.
A lot of layers to it for sure.
Yeah. So
when it comes to this kind of grief, jealousy that you're describing here, is this the kind of thing, I think the writer's worried, asking, well, is this going to mess with me when I try to have a relationship with her? I'm feeling a little uneasy. This maybe goes back to your recommendation that the author take some time. Is that kind of why you're saying there needs to be a cool off?
A cool off period. Yep. Going into any kind of a relationship with mixed feelings is a green flag, I would say. It's a great green flag to take a step back, take a deep breath, and take some time to unpack those conflicting feelings. And then hopefully Kate is someone that this person can communicate with once they get to a point where they want to communicate and they feel safe to communicate how they're feeling. So, because that's going to be important going forward. If they are going to pursue a relationship, they have to be able to talk about this stuff and be able to be present with one another while they're processing these emotions.
These early moments of relationships and even these kinds of exciting situations that can happen, communication seems like a really big component of this. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this situation. I almost think of people in the lifestyle. There's people that live there, they're locals, and then there's people that are visiting, right? They're tourists. And in this case, I think this is one of those scenarios where here you have some people and their friends, and one night the chemistry is just there. One night, we didn't start the night thinking this would happen. This wasn't on the radar. The chemistry's there. There's love in the air. And it's like, let's do this. Do we feel like we want to do? Let's do this. And I wonder in that scenario, how should people handle that? Like on one hand, they want to go with the energy and they don't necessarily want to intellectualize it and do a lot of thinking. But on the other hand, scenarios can get out of control really fast. And it's like, okay, should there be a conversation? And how much of that do we have before it's starting to feel like we're overthinking it? And maybe we should overthink it. Maybe we should be for sure we want to do this. Or maybe you would say, no, don't overthink it. Go with it. We've got to be primitive humans. Doctor, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I might have an unpopular view.
Okay.
And I suppose it's from personal experience of trying one and trying something else. And also, what I've heard from others, although nothing's absolute, obviously, but I will always advocate for the talk. And someone from my past called it the 5-point elevator pitch. And the idea is a good one. Which is to slow things down enough to cover 5 points, which could stir further conversation or could lead to the action continuing. But it's quick enough to where people don't get bogged down and go, okay, well, this isn't sexy anymore. And it's really, in a nutshell, covering, hey, let me make 5 points before we move on, or we move ahead, or what have you. What my name is, kind of just reiterating who you are and allowing yourself to make personhood out of yourself, to quantify yourself as a person. What your STI status is, what your relationship status is, what you're into and what you're not into. And that can be done really quickly in a time that it would take to ride an elevator. Okay. And that, I think, is a really good way of getting that conversation in, but not having it, well, let's have a talk about how we're going to do this. And what happens if we feel a certain way tomorrow, or what have you. It kind of puts the brakes on, but not so much that you stop. And depending on the people that are involved, it could go, you know what? That's actually quite a turn on that you've brought that up. can we talk more about what you're into? And that can often happen where they pick that out and go, oh, we can actually talk about what our erotic orientations are and see if there's a match there. And sometimes the conversation can be carried on from that. And other times someone goes, oh, okay, this, and this. Can we do it now? And at least it gets it in there, right? It doesn't have to be long, lengthy, and highly intellectual. It can be, I'm feeling responsible. I want to be responsible for this experience. And this is what I'm offering up. And the other thing I think a lot of people also could do in situations like this, and most of the time, even when I've done this, people stop and go, what? Never asked me that before, is if things are starting to get hot and heavy, hot and heavy, is to ask that other person, what kind of experience would you like to have with me tonight or today? And or you could continue that and say, what kind of experience would you like to have with me today that will be memorable and enjoyable for you going forward, or tomorrow, or what have you? And a lot of people, we don't ask each other that when we're about to have a sexual experience. And for some people, they don't even think about it. And I would advocate for either of those things, because they're not long, they're not deep in terms of, dragging things out or making things heavy or what have you. They're very quick to the point and show a lot of responsibility and consideration for that person that you're about to have an intimate experience with.
Good point. You've spoken, sorry, got a little bit of that COVID lung left. You've spoken a little bit about going with your gut. Yeah. And I think that you've normalized that human experience of, maybe I do have a jitter here. And I think that you're kind of teaching people, look, you may have some apprehension. I think you're taking the high road of saying, look, I want to normalize that. I'm not going to tell you to push through it at all costs. You must absolutely do this. There will always be another chance to have sex. And so if this chance doesn't feel perfect for you and you do have some hesitation, give yourself permission to listen to your gut. And more people need to do that. And the second thing you're talking about is unpacking some of the etiquette and some of the communication and how it can be done in a way that still feels mature and responsible and explores concept. While also, because if Anonymous could have asked that question, hey, Kate, what kind of experience are you hoping to have with me tonight? Or if she could have asked that, hey, Anonymous probably would have said, oh, I'm really looking forward to being with you.
Yeah.
I'm not even actually that excited to see you and Emily or to have 10 people in the room. I'm just super excited to be with you. And that would have been very informative. And Kate could have heard that and gone, oh, okay. That information now perhaps could inform my evening, or perhaps not, but maybe it would have turned out the exact same way.
Right.
But then Kate would have knowingly decided, that's not the evening I want. I really like your friend or whatever.
Yep.
So those two pieces you're already talking about, I think, are really important. I wonder about a third thing. Okay. Now, here we are. Anonymous is in the aftermath of this. Mm-hmm. And I think we could unequivocally say, for Anonymous, this was an emotional evening. It was unpleasant. Anonymous left. Anonymous is now pleased to discover that Kate does like him and feels like there's a path for this, which didn't used to be true. So now Anonymous is pretty excited about that. But Anonymous says, I struggle with now having a little bit of an emotional complex around sex with her and the shared experience that's in my memory. I was conscious, I was there. And I worry about that now. And Anonymous is even struggling with this idea of like, I'm wondering if this feels disrespectful to myself to proceed anyway, when I do have a hang up. In your experience, you deal with so many people who have been through unique situations, and certainly a percentage of that, even if they are very pro-sex and really enjoy it, a percentage of it is going to be people that go, boy, that was unpleasant. Yeah. And I have emotions now attached to this. What advice would you give to Anonymous to either heal from this or address this, or perhaps what is the procedure for this, for any human that comes out of a sexual experience that turns out not to have lived up to the hype and they feel shaken up by it? What advice, what is the procedure for those kind of coming down from that experience and trying to move beyond it?
In a lot of time, in a lot of instances, folks, when they have a negative experience, will file that away as permanently negative and will never want to have a similar experience again. And I'm not exactly picking that up from Anonymous. Anonymous is still asking the question, am I going to feel that way? But oftentimes the default is, yeah, that wasn't good, and so I'm not ever going to do that again. And I would suggest overall, generally, to not make one bad situation a blanket rejection of any of those, of another situation that might be similar. In other words, another foursome or what have you, or a partner swap. Experimentation can really help determine whether or not something is going to work for you and that you want to include it in your erotic habits. So a one-time experience, but if someone prefer, and this is something that I get into other sexologists with, oftentimes there should be a caveat added to that. Just because you had a bad experience once and you decide that you don't ever want to have that experience again, that's okay too. That is okay too. In the end, it matters whether or not that person feels safe doing something like that again. And if they never feel safe doing that again, that's okay. This is not well, you should experiment more to find out if it really was, not going to work for you, or if you're just catastrophizing. No. Everyone is different. So while I would recommend experimenting again, that's not a requirement. If for Anonymous, this is not ever going to work for them again, that's fine too. That's fine too. I would be more concerned about of Anonymous having question as to whether or not Kate is being truthful about the alcohol thing, because that is a trust issue. And if Anonymous is going into this relationship, setting the experience of the foursome aside and struggling with those emotions, the question, it sounds like to me, why Anonymous might be hesitant to pursue anything with Kate seems, at least from what I'm hearing, seems more related to whether or not Kate is being straightforward about her wanting to participate in that experience to begin with. And was she really intoxicated? From Anonymous's perspective, was she really intoxicated, or is she just telling me that? And that's where trust comes in. And that's something really, really to unpack for Anonymous before they pursue a relationship, whether or not they still like her. Because that's going to keep, to me, that's what's going to keep coming up if they pursue a relationship with Kate is, can she be trusted? Can she be trusted? Can she be trusted? And that's what's going to keep coming up. Sounds like to me.
Definitely complex. And the thing that you talked about earlier that I thought, man, that's really interesting. The three parts of self and how those are not necessarily congruent, right? That there's going to be overlap, like the Venn diagram, and there's going to be distinction, and that's okay. It's okay to have like this sense of contradiction sometimes, and that's going to happen in eroticism. And it sounds like in this case, Anonymous is confronting each piece of that and trying to kind of sort them in themselves. If a person wanted to do more deep work on those three areas of mind, I'm curious, and I'm throwing this out completely out of the blue. You've had no prep, but I'm just curious if a book comes to mind, or a speaker, or if there's something people can Google to kind of go deeper into exploring those three parts of themselves.
A book does not come to mind, although I recently just purchased one that I haven't read yet, but was highly recommended by Dr. Wednesday Martin, and it's called Open Monogamy. I can't think of who the author is right off the top of my head, but I certainly can add it in the comments or in the description of the video. And it apparently dives into these particular issues. It's a pretty recent book, I think. So perhaps that one could help, but nothing else really comes to the top of it, comes to mind.
But still, really interesting stuff. And I know for each human, who's listening to this, they find sex interesting and they can relate a little bit to that writer, and they can relate to everybody in that room. And there's a part of them thinking, you know what, maybe that self-exploration is very healthy to do even before we get to gut instincts and communication and etiquette and post-sexuality connection. Maybe there's a little bit of introspection that humans can do. And so sounds like that's probably a good idea generally.
I think that we can be the best version of ourselves in a partnership, in a sexual experience, and also just how we carry ourselves and how we understand ourselves is to take the time. And that's not easy for young folks because they're not taught that at home most of the time, is to take the time to figure out who you are orientation wise, because you could be a Kinsey 2 or a Kinsey 4, or you could be 1 or 6. It really just depends. You could be completely straight or completely gay, or you could be somewhere in the middle. Who are you relationally? Do you really want to have one partner? Do you want to be monogamous? I mean, I'm a scientist, and if we look at animal species, we see lifelong partnered species, and we also see bonobos. Okay. So why would we be exempt from that as also, hominids that walk this planet? And thirdly, who are you erotically? Now that one might take a little bit of experimentation, and that's where it's going to be important to find safe partners to explore those things with. But who are you erotically as well? And to be unafraid to explore that. Who we are erotically isn't scary. It's that we've been taught that it's scary. So, and a lot of this can be done solo, to try to experiment, like, what do I like, what do I don't like, and so forth. But also partnered too. And those are experimentations that I think are worthwhile, so that when we do go into the dating world, quote unquote, we want to get serious, we can sit across from that person who we're serious about and go, here's who I am. Is this going to work for you? And are we going to be able to stay bonded and connected over the lifespan? And how are we going to do that? And I know that's a heavy question and a heavy statement, but ultimately a lot of people, that's what they're looking for, is that person. And that's going to look a lot different depending on who we are.
Well said. If we don't know ourselves, we can't expect other people to. Right. Got to start with us. Exactly. Well, we do have one other question, and I think this one is a little different, has a little bit of a different kind of vibe to it, but very sex related, and certainly something that, threw my co-host and I for a little bit of a loop, and had a lot of layers to it. So the second question is titled, "My Husband's Masturbation Depression." And this writer's also anonymous, and the writer identifies as female. "Hi. I would like some advice for my situation. My husband has an issue where he can get some form of acute depression-like symptoms if he doesn't get to ejaculate when he's horny. My sex drive is lower than his, so he tries to jerk off. Problems arise when he becomes manic looking at porn, where he will stay up until 3 a.m. looking for something to finish to, or when he hints in the morning that he's horny, but I don't take the bait. We have a young child that we need to care for, so I don't always have time or energy or interest. His mood drops dramatically to the point where he can't get out of bed. His brain feels depleted. He shuts down when I try to talk to him, and it ruins his whole day and occasionally the next day. He claims that he needs to finish to feel normal. When I try to cheer him up or ask him what would make him feel better, the answer is always, I don't know. This is so frustrating because I have to take on all the responsibilities when I already do the majority of the chores in the house, and now I have to play therapist if I want to get him to a point where he will help me. He sometimes tries to blame me for the situation because, quote, you know how down I get, so you should help me jerk off real quick, then we can be back to normal, end quote. We still have sex a couple times a week, but these moods of his still come at least twice a month. This has been going on for a whole decade that we've been together. I've tried talking to him to get some help because he's tired all the time. And during the first year of the pandemic, our marriage was terrible, and we would get into arguments, which end with him raging and breaking things and leaving the house for 6+ hours. These experiences have scared me mentally, and now I find it harder to be empathetic toward him. My mood has stabilized due to my hormonal imbalances being treated, in addition to seeing a therapist. We focus on self-care things for myself, but I can't help but think that the crux of our problem is my husband. He refuses to see a therapist or doctor about his moods, and I have a problem with confronting slash setting and maintaining boundaries. How do I convince him to get help when he's anxious about his mental health and isn't willing to put the work in? Sincerely, Anonymous.
Well, I think it stops at he's not willing to put the work in. And I understand that's a simple answer, but just like when you're dealing with someone who's struggling with substance abuse, the person who's struggling with substance abuse has to be the one that wants to stop. Grandma, mom, wife, kids are not going to tell that person to stop. That person has to want to stop using substances that are harmful to them. And if the husband here is unwilling to do the work, there's not going to be any convincing him, from what it sounds like. And there sounds like there's a high level of codependency here in this situation, and I'm very concerned about what seems like sexual coercion, or at least an attempt at sexual coercion on the part of the husband. So this crosses over into problematic behavior, some dynamics between them that indicate power dynamics that are unequal, and codependency. And I think you probably have some thoughts on that as well.
Well, and I guess one question,
I'm not even gonna, there's nothing for me to talk about here with regard to the sexual part, because the relational part to me stands out.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of layers to it. But one thing that comes out of the letter that I'm curious about on a sexual academic level here. So here you have a situation. Now, obviously they have, kind of level 2 problems and then like some things that need to be addressed. Right. But at the foundation, it sounds like if we ask husband's answer is very simple. He says, "Oh gosh, everything that you see about me that you dislike has to do with me not feeling fulfilled sexually. If I have that, then boy, I'm a prince and everything's good." Okay, leaving aside whether or not that's the wife's interpretation of him, this argument of, I want more sex, you are my partner, so I need to come to you for that, if that's our agreement. And then the negotiation between these two of like her saying, okay, but we have sex twice a week, and like you want more help from me, like in the morning you want me to help finish you or whatever it is. Well, I'm declining to do that sometimes. I have my reasons. And then he says, okay, but there are consequences to that, and this consequence is how I'm feeling. And so this is an interesting kind of moment I can notice where sex and negotiation and kind of like are both, I would assume when I get a letter, I always assume both people are being super good faith, super authentic, right? And so I assume that his quotes are real when he says, look, this feels automatic to me, I'm not making this up for attention. And I assume her truth when she says, I'm sincerely not in the mood, I am burdened, I have other things going on. And I wonder, as a sexologist, when you notice that discrepancy where sex seems to be part of the issue for both pieces, how do we navigate that? How do you navigate that part of the conversation?
Well, as a sexologist, so I'll stick with that, as uncomfortable as it might be to hear that or hear this, no one in a relationship is obligated to provide sex for the other person. And that's baseline. If, however, we remove all of the emotionally laden issues that are attached to this particular situation, and we have a disparity between erotic orientations, okay, that happens. And just like in our previous example, it comes back to, what were the conversations in the beginning? How were these two people able to discern whether or not they were going to be compatible over the long term from an erotic standpoint. And that can also include frequency, etc., which can, ebb and flow over the course of a relationship. But oftentimes there, especially in monogamous relationships where there aren't any other partners to enjoy intimacy with, disparities between the, desire levels is incredibly common. And my industry often, we like to publish a lot of books on, how to turn on your lover 101, et cetera, et cetera. But again, this is that situation alone would warrant an hour-long conversation. So disparities in sexual desire and sexual need happen often, or actually I would say they're more common than they're not. And sometimes that can be mitigated with those discussions during the dating phase. Sometimes they manifest after marriage, which can be brought on by illness, or, especially the research often shows that long-term relationships have a more negative effect on women's sexual desire than they do on men's sexual desire if we're talking about cisgendered people. And I mentioned, again, in one of my other podcasts, a paper that was written about what some of the causes might be for lower female desire than male desire in long-term relationships. If they're having frequent sex and it's still not enough for him, and we're assuming that they're both coming to this situation in good faith, in a nutshell, there's a disparity in their desire. And sometimes that, like in other situations in long-term relationships, sometimes they aren't resolved. Sometimes they're just what they are. And we can either continue in the relationship as we want, as we are. We can have conversations about, well, maybe we need to open up our marriage, or the marriage ends. So we like to dismiss the importance of sexuality in long-term relationships, but a lot of them end over these kind of disparities. So dismissing the disparities and not recognizing them is problematic for the health of the long-term couple.
But I think that your other point, I think, comes back to play here, where you advised the writer and said, look, at a fundamental philosophical level, I'm of the opinion that you do not owe sex to anybody, and you just have an inherent right to decline, and you shouldn't be made to feel ashamed or guilty for that. It may be the case that there is a discrepancy. That may be a painful reality, and that may cause complications to the relationship that may include ending the relationship. However, you should not be feeling like you're doing something wrong by authentically telling your truth. And you're also allowed and encouraged to communicate your disapproval of some of these other things. Because you're feeling a certain way, husband, you're feeling somewhat depressed, you're feeling anxious. You don't therefore have permission to throw something, or to break something, or to make me feel unsafe. And then to just trace it back and go, oh, well, this is only happening because you didn't, give me a hand this morning. Okay, no, like that. I hear you taking an ethical stand there and saying, no, that's not going to fly. Even if sex does have consequences and needs to be taken seriously, there is a way to adultly manage these things, and having right expectations about each other and our behaviors as well.
Yep.
Good stuff there, Doc.
Yeah. So I hope for the couple that he decides to be more proactive and participatory in whatever efforts towards healing. But until they're both willing to participate, I am skeptical.
Last question, just because I think it's related to this. And I kind of want to separate this question from the story, because the story has so many levels to it. And we really have to be mindful of, like, this person who doesn't feel very safe. So, separating it completely just for a moment, sex and its effect on our emotions. Sex is such a fascinating physiological and psychological thing, from the endorphins and the euphoria to the joy and elation that can come with it, to the complex emotions of fear and jealousy and so many things. When somebody tells you that they notice their sexual health is very related to their mental health, that's something that came out of this letter a little bit. And there could be somebody that says that in life, that just says, doc, I really notice that this is my best medicine, that I, feel certain ways without this and certain ways with this. If you were kind of going to comment on some of that relationship between sexual health and mental health for some people, and the power that sexuality and eroticism can have in human psychology, I just wonder if you have any thoughts to kind of put some color on that page, or even just kind of normalize that for people, because I'm sure many people relate.
2 words. Of course. Of course. And I think the thing that we want to remember, and we've struggled with that in sexology too, is sex doesn't necessarily, or sexual orientation or the expression of our sexuality doesn't always take the form of sexual activity. Because for asexual people, their mental health is more positively affected by being asexual and being allowed to be asexual, or trans, or bi, or gay, or straight, or what have you. Again, we come down to erotic orientation and relational orientation. All of these things affect us emotionally. And if we are not, and you would know this too, as human beings, we are social creatures, although those of us on the autism spectrum are a little less social. But human connection is very important for a large swath of our species. And part of that is sexual behavior and sexual expression and sharing sexual experiences with one another. And depending on those 3 aspects of ourselves, right? If those needs aren't being fulfilled, it's going to impact our mental health. Of course it is. And let's set aside the neurochemical part. Just from, feeling connected to someone. And we find that when we give hugs to each other, non-sexual hugs, and how that positively affects mental health. If you talk about, infant growth, and how they thrive when they have an interesting environment and they have caretakers that respond to them correctly or appropriately for whatever it is that infant is doing. All these things, we used to call it wasting disease when children didn't have adequate emotional connection and physical connection. Why do we think that wouldn't still apply as adults, right? So of course it affects our mental health. Again, I think we can help ourselves by getting in touch with who we are relationally, or from a sexual orientation and erotic orientation, so that we can better communicate to others who we are. And yes, that is scary, because we're all somehow scared of being straightforward with one another, because it's very easy to judge. And we've been taught to do that around sexuality. We've been taught to judge, to shame, to call someone who has a different sexual interest than us perverted, to keep them closeted. And I've even had, when I was in practice still, had people whose partners knew of their, let's say, their sexual orientation, okay? 2 people got married, one of them was bi. And that person wanted to continue to have bisexual experiences. But the deal was, well, you can, but you have to keep it from the kids, the family, the coworkers, the friends, and everything else. Just keep it on the down low. Have someone you could hook up with that's going to be quiet and not say anything. And then don't talk about it when you're at home. Well, if the person who we are in love with and who we took vows with closets us, why wouldn't that same thing happens in a greater scale with strangers? Because we're afraid, and because we're not taught to simply say, this is who I am. I don't know what the solution is. I've been talking about this for 2 decades. I don't know if it will ever be solved. And I personally have been at the receiving end of everything from rejection to violence for simply stating who I am and owning it. And there's legitimate reasons to be afraid. I would like to think there's going to be at some point a utopia where we can all just be straightforward about who we are in those three aspects of our lives so that we can find each other. Okay? Everyone can find themselves or other people that they can relate to, whether you're asexual or hypersexual. And I have a problem with that term, but let's say very sexual or anywhere in between. I continue to maintain hope that we will get closer to a world such as that.
Last thought, if you have a book suggestion or an area that you'd encourage people that are just starting this sexual conversation inside of themselves, they're starting to ask, okay, who am I? You know, how do I kind of orient myself? Or maybe they don't even have sexual language yet. They don't even know what the word is to describe who they are or what their proclivities are. Is there sort of a 101 book out there or space where people can kind of just encounter that stuff?
Yes. And I will name two books from a colleague, rather high profile colleague whose books we carry at the museum. His name is Justin Laymiller, and he's a very well-known sex researcher from the Kinsey Institute. He does really, really great work. He's done two books that I think can be very helpful. His first one was The Psychology of Human Sexuality. And now this is a book that's often used in, say, freshman level college or very like senior level high school. It's very simple, it's very basic, and it touches on a lot of aspects of human sexuality through a scholarly lens, and it takes the salaciousness out of it. So I would definitely suggest that one. And then his second book, I think it's his second book, could be sequential to that. Tell Me What You Want. And that's a book that he just published a couple of years ago. And that book is based on a research study of, I think he had 1,000 or 2,000 respondents for people that talk about what their fantasies are. And he found a lot of similarities amongst all of us human beings in terms of what our top fantasies are and how we can have a conversation around those. So I would suggest The Psychology of Human Sexuality, where we're talking about orientation, relationships, etc. And then where we're talking about our erotic orientation is Tell Me What You Want, both from Justin Laymiller. I think that's a good starting point to cover both or all of those particular three areas in a way that's easily read and palatable to everyone, whether they have more conservative leaning opinions or attitudes towards sexuality, or they're dealing with a lot of sexual shame, either from their upbringing or messages they got from society, religion, etc. And also like it can tackle anatomy and, you know, how do we define parts of our bodies and so forth.
Awesome recommendations. And I got to tell you, this comes up in my practice a lot. And just having those suggestions, those books, just being able to give that to people, especially just, hey, this is informational. It's not advocating for anything that isn't authentic to you. It's making you aware. At least this is something safe that you can kind of encounter and you're encouraged to explore. And then adjacent to that, encouraged to communicate. And
yeah,
that there's good things come out of that. So
yeah,
great recommendations.
Yeah, these two books are, they don't have an agenda. They are from an observant or an observational standpoint, and they take any agenda out.
Means a lot.
Someone who doesn't understand basic anatomy is not going to want to read a book on polyamory.
Right. There needs to be a step one, a place where it's like, welcome to the conversation. Right. Thank you for being interested in this. Thank you for caring about your own sexual health. Right. And let's start just with the put your toe in the water. Let's learn a little bit about you. And I think that makes sex much less intimidating for people when you approach it and say, look, we're not here to throw the whole zoo at you and introduce things to you that you've never heard of before or have no interest in. Right. We're here to encourage you and give you a safe place and educational content to ask questions you want to ask and get answers that you want answered. and then go about your day. If you don't have another thought in your head about what goes on in the penguin exhibit, don't worry about it. It has nothing to do with you. And if one day it ever piques your curiosity, you can mosey back over here and you can learn all about it. But I like that. I kind of like the subjective, let people be at their own, place.
Yes.
These are good resources to help them get there.
And I think that's I think solo exploration is a great starting point, because when we learn, and I mean in terms of reading these books,
sure,
kind of thinking about these things, because if we can start identifying parts of ourselves through educating ourselves, then we're better able, when we do finally start to engage with others, coming back to your first question, set those boundaries for ourselves, right? So I think exploration starts alone with materials like that. Then we can engage others, and then we're more apt to, better prepared to take care of ourselves.
Well said, Doc. Nice. I really appreciate you taking the time to answer these real questions.
You taking the time.
Well, I tell you, it's so nice to have a colleague who specializes in it and is local to the area, and it's just so wonderful to have access to you. And I appreciate you letting me bug you with these questions. As soon as you put it up on Instagram and said, "Yeah, I don't have an agenda for this show. Any ideas?" I was like, "Oh, I'm jumping on this." These have been on our show, and we've fumbled with them a little bit, but boy, I really liked where you took it. And I thought that was really well said, really informational, really appreciate your time, and gracious that you opened up your podcast and allowed me to be a part of it and bring these questions, because I know these folks are really going to appreciate the answers.
No, I appreciate you bringing the questions to me and being so engaging. I ever since, I was first on your show, we've just had a really nice way of communicating, and I'm glad to see that it's continued over the years. So thank you for being a colleague and a friend.
Thank you for being a friend. Do. We just became the Golden Girls, Vicky.
Oh, yeah. I got to get my red hat out now.
All right, my friend. Well, look, I will let us wrap it up there. Yep. And looking forward to being a part of this conversation, and can't wait to have you back on our show. Just love being a part of this with you. And thank you so much.
I appreciate that. And, with the reality show, hopefully it's beginning to film soon. It's been delayed. I might show up at your studio or wherever you are and get it on film, because you know what? I know you love it.
I love it. And it's a good visual. We got a fun studio, and there's lots of fun things to see. So that could be awesome too. But anyway, my friend, thank you for having me. It's a joy to join you today.
Thank you so much. And for those of you out there, please tune in next week. However, I don't have a topic for next week yet. I'm probably going to still chew on this episode with Dr. Jim and go check him out at Pod Therapy. Is that right?
Pod Therapy. Mm-hmm.
Pod Therapy, guys. Yeah. And lastly, do you guys have a website or an Instagram or anything you'd like to?
Sure. Promote? Yeah. You can find everything at podtherapy.net. Yep. Type in podtherapy.net. You can find all the socials. You can find all the podcasts and all the fun extra stuff. And that's one-stop shop. So love to meet new people. Our show is just two therapists talking over questions that come in just like this. And we take on everything from sex to relationships to more severe mental health stuff, sometimes more casual. We try to keep it light and funny. It's a good time for everybody, and anybody's welcome to come hang out with us if they like it.
Awesome. So everybody go visit Dr.
podtherapy.net.
Yeah, podtherapy.net. And Nick, and I don't know how to pronounce his last name.
It doesn't matter.
Okay. With that, we're going to wrap up, and we will see everyone soon.
Bye, everybody.